marks Holocaust Memorial Day. It's also a very extra special occasion as the 80th anniversary today of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. 1.1 million people were murdered by the Nazis in that Polish death camp. One of the very few survivors was Lily Ebert. She is a Holocaust survivor who has spent her life telling her individual story, trying to make sure that younger generations know what life was like, what death was like in that camp. Today, her great-grandson, Dov Forman, joins us to talk this through. Good morning to you, Dov.
Good morning, Julia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. We know King Charles will be attending Auschwitz, the first British monarch to do so today for those memorial events where survivors are going to be able to tell their tales. It won't be politicians speaking, it will be survivors. And of course, fewer and fewer survivors of Auschwitz and of any of the death camps are still with us to tell their tale. Very sadly, your great-grandmother died aged 100 last October, but tell us a little bit about what Lily went through, what her experience was, and what happened to your family.
My great-grandmother was incredible. Aged 100, she still was going out to share her story in schools, universities, workplaces, places of faith, to fulfill the promise that she made herself in Auschwitz, that if she survived against all the odds, she would tell her story, not just for herself and for her family, but for the millions who didn't survive, because 6 million people were murdered in the Holocaust, over 1 million in Auschwitz, but there are still 2 million names of those 6 million that we don't know, because the typical story of the Holocaust involves the wiping out of entire families, communities, villages, towns, in rivers, ravines, forests, purpose-built gas chambers, factories of death. My great-grandmother was sent to Auschwitz in 1944, in July 1944, towards the end of the war, when the Nazis took the Hungarians, over 400,000 Hungarian Jews, and murdered over 420,000 of them. My great-grandmother was taken to Auschwitz with 3 sisters, her youngest brother and her mother. On arrival, her mother, her youngest sister and youngest brother were taken straight to be killed. She never saw them again, she never got to say goodbye. And she describes the moment when she arrived in Auschwitz and realized where she was and realized that her family had been murdered. She asked someone who had been there a lot longer than she had, "What's that terrible smell? What factory is this? What do they produce here?" The prisoner pointed towards the chimney, said to her, "This is not a factory. That's where they've just murdered your family. That smoke, that's from the crematorium, where they burn Jewish bodies." And that was the moment when my great-grandmother had the realization of where she had arrived to.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so extraordinary. It is almost unbelievable, and yet it happened, and it's well documented. And yet to this day, and perhaps getting worse now, there are people who deny that the Holocaust happened at all. They deny that it was anything uniquely bad in human history, the industrial scale, deliberate murder of a people because of their ethnicity, their religion. Purely for that. Okay, yes, we know, of course, we know that gypsies, we know that gay people, disabled people, others were also deliberately targeted and murdered as well. But in terms of the scale of killing, this was a Holocaust of Jewish lives. What do you make of how so many people today claim, and I can never work out whether they really believe it or not, that the Holocaust, well, it wasn't a particularly evil act in history, or it didn't happen at all. When you know that you lost members of your family, I think in all 100 members, extended members of your family were murdered by the Nazis in death camps. How do you respond to that?
We are seeing an incredibly worrying trend in the world, a rise of distortion, denial, a concerted effort by people to continue to dehumanize Jews and delegitimize their place in society. And we must call this out for what it is. It's pure Jew hatred, this denial, this distortion. As I said, it's a concerted effort. This isn't happening by mistake. Yeah. There are people going out on social media, setting up accounts with the purpose of indoctrinating our young children in this country and in others who are scrolling on social media, absorbing over 50% of their news from social media. They want to ensure that those people hate Jews. And to do that, they do things like deny the Holocaust. They go to pages like mine, where I share my great-grandmother's story, and they say that this didn't happen, or they spread hate. Every single day I wake up to hundreds of messages, people saying that the Holocaust was a hoax, that Hitler missed one, that what happened on October 7th to women should happen to my great-grandmother. And it's absolutely disgusting. But I think two things need to happen. One, we need to make sure that when politicians say never again, they actually mean it.
Yep.
That includes actually making sure that the education works. And yesterday, a poll was released to say that 1 in 3 young adults, that's 18 to 29-year-olds in the UK, can't name a single Auschwitz death or concentration or labour camp or even a ghetto. That's shocking. And in fact, it's no longer surprising to me why we see so much anti-Semitism and why we've seen so many people in the past 15 months go out week on week sharing anti-Semitic views or standing alongside those who are. Because when education is failing so badly, when people can't learn from the past and see where unchecked hatred and unchallenged hatred, injustice and intolerance leads, and that's to places like the gas chambers and to places like Auschwitz, then it's not a surprise that they don't understand why being hateful on the streets against Jewish people is worrying.
Yeah, and indeed, and as many pointed out, you know, the death camps didn't just spring up overnight. It was years and years of you know, othering of Jewish people, blaming Jewish people for everything. And you're seeing it right now. We see it with those fortnightly marches. We see it in the reaction. Before there was a single IDF soldier in Gaza after October the 7th, 2023, marches, you know, basically blaming Israel for what had happened on October the 7th, that awful massacre. It is, I mean, I have to say, I found it absolutely terrifying. And I'm not Jewish. I found it terrifying, and I'm amazed by how many Jewish friends of mine have talked about whether Britain is still a safe country to live in, and that is an appalling stain on our country, that anyone should ever think that. One of the things you did with your great-grandmother, though, was you talked about, you know, young people getting the information on social media. That, you know, you set up a TikTok account for her. She said she wasn't going to dance, thank goodness for that, but that she would answer questions and she would try and go to the places where young people were to learn about the Holocaust. They could actually learn the truth. And how fearful are you that, you know, she was 100 years old. She was a young person. There were other children who survived. There are people now who are going to be at Auschwitz today in their 80s, 90s. In 10 years' time, maybe there may be no survivors left. How important is it that those stories, their reality of their lives and what they saw and experienced themselves, that story continues to be told?
Julia, firstly, back to what you said earlier, I think the society as a whole needs to take what we're seeing, the hatred on our streets, as a warning. Anti-Semitism is for society, it's for democracy. What the canary is in a coal mine. What starts with the Jews never ends there. And when the survivors themselves are warning us that the words they're seeing are echoes of the past, I think we need to take those warnings seriously. And on this memorial, back to your second point, the 80th anniversary, we are seeing the number of survivors dwindling. We're moving further on from the past. The anti-Semitism is rising. The denial, distortion is rising. Awareness of the Holocaust is dwindling. And so when we are the last possible generation to hear from the survivors, we need to become their witnesses, and we need to ensure that we're listening to what they're saying and that we're able to pass on their messages and their stories to the next generations. Because 80 years in the span of human history is not a long time. And so the fact that we've already forgotten the worst human tragedy, which only took place 80 years ago, very far from where we are in the UK, is extremely worrying. And I think that we need to commit this year to ensuring that when we say never again, it's not just a mantra or a phrase said by politicians, but it's actually something which means action, which means that when you see hatred, you won't allow it to go unchecked or unchallenged. And we must also remember that never again was not only a promise of never again will there be gas chambers or Auschwitz-Birkenau's purposefully built factories of death in Europe again. It was also that never again will ordinary people stand idly by as this hatred against Jews and indeed against others went kind of rife through society. And that hatred is rearing its ugly head again today. So again, on this 80th anniversary, we have to decide, are we going to make never again actually mean something? Or are we just going to continue in the same trajectory as we have done for the last 80 years?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree with every single word. Dov Forman, I so appreciate you joining us. He is the great-grandson of Holocaust survivor Lee Ebert, who sadly died at the age of 100 last October, but goodness, thank goodness me, survived Auschwitz to tell the world about her experience.